I think we're ready to kick off. It's 4 o'clock. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Mike Parr. I'm the president of American Bird Conservancy. And we're going to be talking today about something that I love, which is taking good bird photos. I also take a lot of bad bird photos, but hopefully today we'll hear from some great photographers about how we can all make our photography a little bit better. I just want to start by thanking my co-presenters. And I'd also like to thank the ABC Communications team, Jordan Rutter, who you'll be seeing, will be moderating, Claire Nielsen, Darius Subkowski, and Connor Marshall have particularly helped with putting this webinar together. Thank you, folks. And again, Jordan will be the Q&A moderator, so please put your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. Thank you for that. So just before we get started, for those who don't know American Bird Conservancy, we are a non-profit bird conservation organization focused on preventing bird extinctions. We work a lot on that in Hawaii and Latin America and the Caribbean with partners, and also turning around the large decline in more widespread birds that you've probably heard about from some of the media from last year through habitat conservation, and also really halting the threats that affect all birds, such as bird collisions with glass, buildings, pesticides, and other threats. And finally, building conservation capacity in science. So if you like what you're hearing about ABC and are interested in supporting us, you can go online to abcbirds.org, and that's a good place to support the organization. A couple other things. We will be posting some resources on good places to go and take bird photographs, and also some extra tips from myself and some of the other presenters online. And I'd recommend if you get a pen ready at the end of the webinar, there'll be some information to write down on web addresses and email addresses that you might want to note. Today's presentations will last about 40 minutes. Then we will have time for Q&A after that. So we're going to get started. So I'm just going to go through quickly and let you know about my co-presenters, Owen Deutsch, whom I've done photography in the field with in Canada and Peru. And we've done a book with recently. Grace Scalzo is a great photographer who helps ABC a lot with photography, as does Michael Stubblefield, another friend of mine. All three are wonderful photographers, and we're going to learn something from their experiences. And thanks again to Jordan for moderating. So next slide, please. These are the topics we're going to cover today. We're really going to talk about some of the basics of bird photography, and then we're going to see some of the favorite photographs from each of us, and we'll talk about some of the elements of getting those photographs and how we went about it, and there'll also be some conservation tips which we're going to mention today. So I'm just going to give a couple of disclaimers. I am not a professional bird photographer. I've been a birder since I was a child. I've been photographing birds seriously for about 7 years. And really what I want to focus on myself today is, what would I have liked to have known 7+ years ago that would help me with my photography? And I've learned a lot in those 7 years. Some of the things we'll just talk about today are basics to do with cameras, camera settings. There'll be a lot of discussion about how to frame images, particularly from some of my co-presenters, and then some of the conservation tips. So next slide, please. So here's sort of the main question that we're going to try and tackle today. What makes a good bird photograph, and how to get better bird photographs? Next, please. And so really my personal definition of a good bird photograph is, if you're happy with it, then it's a good photo. Most of the time, photographs I'm taking are really mostly for fun, but also post some on ABC's social media feed. Some of the things that I'd just like to start off with to talk about are, obviously, where you go to photograph birds is one of the most important things. And we won't be talking about that today. It's probably a whole other webinar, but we'll have some ideas online of some of our favorite places. Some of the other things that we won't talk about much, but I just want to tee up at the beginning. Things like weather and time of day are important. For me, weather is less so, because if I'm out with my camera and the weather's bad, I'm going to try and make the best of it. And sometimes you can get some of your best photographs when it's raining, when it's snowing, or when there's fog or mist. Just depends on the circumstances. And some of those photographs can be very dynamic depending on what's going on. So I photograph no matter what the weather is. Early morning and late day light tends to be better, but Owen in particular will talk about getting good photographs even during bright light. One thing I want to really emphasize at the beginning though is logistics. One of the biggest problems I've had in the past, which I messed up too many times, is going out into the field and leaving my charged batteries in my hotel room, in my car, or somewhere where I couldn't get to them and running out of battery in the field. One of the most frustrating things, because you've got that bird sitting right there and your battery died. So always remember, have a couple of spare batteries in a pocket in your backpack, and also make sure you have plenty of chips, whatever kind of cards you use, compact flash or SD cards. Make sure you've got more than you're ever going to need. They're not that expensive, but it's super frustrating to have the bird sitting in front of you and you've suddenly run out of card space and you're desperately trying to delete blurred photographs right there in the field. So I think those are super important. Those are two of my top tips. So next slide, please. So of course, choice of equipment is a whole area into itself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my camera. This is the one I use mostly. It's a Canon 1D Mark IV. I bought this secondhand for about $900. And the lens is Sigma 150 to 600 zoom, which is about $1,000. There's a whole range of different lenses you can get, from prime lenses, which means it doesn't zoom, to these longer lenses. Typically, you'll want to have a 400mm lens or more reach than that. Some people use 300. Much less than that, I think you're going to find is challenging, particularly with smaller birds in the field. So I would concentrate on trying to get a longer lens if possible. And you can use things like tripod and flash to try and get faster speed or steadier, but I do a lot of hand holding with my camera. Owen, I know, does a lot too. He's going to talk about that some as well. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk more about digital single lens reflex cameras and photography using those types of cameras than things like point and shoots. I used to do a lot of photography with point and shoots, and you can get good bird photographs with them. This is a white vented storm petrel I took in Peru with a Fuji FinePix camera. I like this picture because you can see the reflection of the bird in the sea. You can see the point where it touched down on the water and also the spray. But typically, these point and shoot cameras don't have autofocus that enables you to select and move your autofocus points around. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Super important to get a lot of photographs in focus, that you have good autofocus points and that you can manually select them. The digital single lens reflex cameras like the Canons, Nikons, Olympus, and Sonys, some of the mirrorless cameras, do have that. I'm not aware of any point and shoots that do. There may be some new ones coming on, but primarily we're going to talk about these DSLR cameras. One thing I did, I looked at megapixels and I looked at digital zoom. I wanted to get cameras with a lot of megapixels. Typically, that's not as much of a factor as you might think. The quality and size of the sensor tends to be super important. Megapixels is important, but it's not the only factor. So I think, again, coming back to the digital single lens reflex cameras, you're going to find probably will get the higher quality photographs you want to do. Next slide, please. However, there is an element of bird photography which I want to touch on, which isn't really what we're going to talk about the most today, but is really valid, which is using cameras to help with identification of birds. And you can certainly do that with point and shoots. You can do it using digiscoping equipment. This is a picture I took on Lake Junin in Peru of a Junin grebe on the right and a silvery grebe on the left. This was very helpful to us to tell that they're rather similar, but you can see the Junin grebe on the right has got a longer, paler colored bill, lighter flanks, it's slightly larger. That type of photography can be very helpful with any kind of camera if you're birding. But we're going to talk more today about trying to get higher quality photographs, the kind of thing that you might frame or share and have really sharp images. So next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about camera settings. This is from a Canon. This is the sort of main setting screen that you get on the back of your camera. The AV at the top left means aperture priority mode, which I personally use aperture priority mode for the most part. Other photographers might want to use manual, but personally I want to reduce the number of variables that I'm trying to affect in the field. So these are settings that I would set up before I go to the field. I have an AV mode, which means that only the aperture is what I'm going to be really working on. The AI servo is artificial intelligence servo, basically means that my autofocus is constantly on because my subject is moving, I'm moving, and it's usually better. It's going to give me better results in that mode. There are other autofocus modes. That's the one I select. The little H with the rectangles is high-speed shooting mode. That's what I always use. It can be 7 or 12 frames a second. You're going to get more shots that way. If you've got your autofocus on servo, you're constantly focusing. You may get several shots in a sequence, 3 or 4 out of focus, but maybe just that one will be in focus. On the right, the little L symbol, that means large JPEGs. I only shoot in large JPEGs. A lot of photographers say you should shoot in RAW, and that's perfectly valid. The reason I don't shoot in RAW is because RAW images tend to be huge, and I burn through chips very, very quickly that way. So if you want to get the best possible, you want to shoot in RAW, but be aware of the fact they're going to be about 25 megabytes per image. It's going to burn up chip space. So we're always making sort of compromises in different areas. These are the settings that I typically take into the field before I even start looking at birds. Next slide, please. So let me talk about autofocus for a second. This was the biggest revelation for me between point and shoots and DSLRs. This is a typical picture I might have gotten in the past where my camera focus is picking up the background. There we go, rather than the bird. And that can happen if you don't have a good autofocus system. Next slide, please. So typically on these DSLRs, you will have little point autofocus, and you can select group or you can select single point, and you can move those around so they're over. I usually use the eye as my main point of focus, although you can vary that. But being able to select those points means that you can pick out the place on the image where you want to get focus, and you will get many, many more pictures in focus using autofocus than you will in a point and shoot situation. So that's a really major strength of using a DSLR over a point and shoot. Next slide, please. So again, if you're trying to get sharp pictures, you want to have them as fast as possible usually. And we talk about, 1,000th of a second or even faster. One of the problems we have is gathering light because you need to get a lot of light to go fast. So next slide, please. So the two things that I use to influence the amount of light I'm getting are my aperture. The larger, the better. And you'll see the numbers work conversely for those who don't know. So the smaller the number there, actually the larger your aperture, which confused me to start with. But this is a lens that I have. The maximum is f5.6. That means I'm gathering the most light. And then I can use ISO, which is the International Standards Organization. That's what it stands for. That really means how much information you're gathering for your image. So the higher that gets, the less information you gather and the quicker your shot is. So you can speed up that way. So those two things are things that I change in the field more than the settings I showed you earlier on. That's to get more light and to speed up my camera. Next slide, please. So here's an example where the aperture setting can cause some problems. One of the things with a smaller aperture is that your depth of field gets narrower. And for this mourning dove, I actually got nice focus on the breast, but I missed getting the head correctly because my depth of field was too shallow. So when birds are close, that's something you're always fighting. Next slide, please. And here's the other thing you're fighting is motion blur because you want to get it fast. So this is something that you're always going to experience, the balance between getting enough depth of field and trying to be fast, where at the same time you're getting motion blur if you're too slow. But there are things you can do about that. Next slide, please. One of the things is to really, make sure that autofocus point is right on the eye. Another thing to do is to really try and keep your camera very steady. So you can either use a tripod, but what I often do is use a tree or part of the car infrastructure and really lean into that and get the camera super steady. And through that, you can sometimes if you take that sequence, you'll get a nice sharp picture like this. So I think that's a good means of going forward. But you're going to have misses. We all have misses. But trying to make sure that you get your autofocus point correct and as bright as possible is going to help you. If it's too dark, do things like bump up your ISO and then give yourself a little bit more aperture if you can. Next slide, please. So another thing, getting back to settings in the field, another problem I've had as a sort of beginner is that a lot of my shots against the sky tend to be too dark. And this was a stellar seagull. I was in Japan in February, photographing stellar seagulls. I highly recommend that when things open back up. But this particular image you can see is underexposed to the bird because the camera's picking up the background. Next slide, please. So the way to handle that is to just bump up your exposure compensation. You may have to experiment with this, but if you get up above 0 there, you can actually make the camera think that it should be brighter. And I always do this before I'm photographing birds against the sky, and you'll usually get better results that way. Next slide, please. So here's the ferruginous hawk. I knew that it was going to be in the air, so I got ready beforehand and was able to bump up my exposure compensation a little bit. And consequently, you can see the detail on the face quite nicely instead of it being in shadow. So essentially, there's only so many things you can control. You can control your camera stability, and I've talked about some of the ways to do that. Your aperture, which typically I try and keep as wide open as possible to gather the most light. Your ISO, you want to keep it as low as you can, but be willing to go up. And on some of the newer cameras, for example, Michael tends to shoot at higher ISO with the 1D Mark III, 1DX Mark III is going to give you better ISO performance. And then trying to keep your shutter speed in the 1000+ range, if it's all possible, and using your autofocus points. All of those things will help you with your camera and settings. The one thing, of course, we can't control is birds because they have minds of their own and they always want to be further away from you, always have a twig in the way or something that's going to make it difficult. But Grace is going to talk about some of these issues about how you can actually predict what birds are going to do and be ready for their interesting behavior. So observing and learning about the birds is going to help you. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to show you a few pictures that I've taken and talk about them briefly, and then I will turn it over to Owen to carry on. So next slide, please. So here's another typical problem I have with image composition. I tend to zoom in, but for large birds, particularly if they're going to fly, my advice is always try and zoom out. If you do use the zoom lens, or get a little bit further back because they always end up being larger than I'm expecting. And I got this condor's wing, unfortunately, was cut out of frame. Next slide, please. Fortunately for me, because I did use the high speed, I did get one in the sequence where it was in. I would have been really, really sad had I not, because it was a great opportunity with this condor flying right in front of me. Next slide, please. So here's a sort of typical photograph. This is a satin bowerbird from Lamington National Park in Australia. It's a typically nice photograph. It's got blurred background. The bird is sharp, but it's rather static and not a lot going on. Next slide, please. So I often prefer a photograph with a story. This is the same exact bird in its bower. And although you can't see the bird terribly well, the eye was illuminated. But this is telling the story of the fact that satin bowerbirds like to remove leaves from their nests that aren't blue in color. They love to have blue showing for the females. All the blue here was a combination of rosella feathers and parts of ballpoint pens, even though you can't see those. Lamington National Park is not full of ballpoint pens, but this one satin bowerbird found all the ones presumably that people had dropped and used them to decorate its bower. So I think it makes for a more interesting story. Next slide, please. Also for composition, often it's not necessary to have the bird large and up front and central. This one I like because the blue of the eastern bluebird offsets the background. I tweaked the saturation up on this one and thought that, having the bird there in the habitat was a nice way to do this, using the autofocus and moving the point from the center to the side. Picked it up nicely. Next slide, please. So here's another idea, which is that having that thousandth of a second, sometimes you don't want to be absolutely crisp, and sometimes you can't be, but sometimes it doesn't matter because you get a little blur in the wings. It shows movement and dynamic. This is a flock of common grackles and red-winged blackbirds. I like the shot because you can see some movement in it, yet the bird's eyes are mostly sharp still. And I kind of like the fun elements of some motion in the pictures. Next slide, please. Conversely, sometimes we want a freeze motion. This was a chestnut-breasted coronet from a trip I did with Owen, and we used multi-flash on this one. We might do another webinar on hummingbird photography at another point. I don't use flash very much. I think it makes the pics look artificial and disturbs the birds. But when you're using very, very fast flash, it hardly makes an impression on the bird, but you can get these nice frozen hummingbird pictures. Next slide, please. So my last picture is this one. It's just showing a different type of composition. This was Palo Alto Baylands in California. Again, I used autofocus to highlight these two blackneck stilts in the top right corner. They're not perfectly sharp, but to me, they look like little cartoon characters. And my friends keep pointing out that my sensor's got dust on it and I never cleaned this up in post-production. Post-production is a whole issue unto itself. We're not going to really touch on that today. I use Lightroom. I'm not super experienced with it, but there are other programs to do that, and you can do lots of great things after the fact. So I will come back at the end and see if I've forgotten to say anything, but I'm now going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Owen Deutsch, who is going to talk a little bit about some of his photography and some things that I hope you can learn from the way Owen takes pictures. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to give you a few ideas about what I do to take more interesting and engaging bird photographs, especially of those little brown jobs that so many of you think are plain and boring, not like those exciting, colorful warblers. There are several reasons I love this picture so much. First of all, the house sparrow is the poster child for an LBJ. But this picture with the soft blue sky and beautiful white blossoms raises the bar on what would otherwise be a plain and boring little brown job. LBJs for many people can be a challenge to identify and get a good picture of. If you concentrate on a handful of details, you can make those pictures shine. I basically created this photo of this, the newborn. Actually, they grow pretty quickly, a chipping sparrow and its mother. With a little bit of luck, but I planned it, I'll explain. In my garden in Indiana, I have this gorgeous tree with some colorful moss on the bark. It just wows me, that moss on the bark. I put several different kinds of bird feeders nearby with a fountain below it and a bubbler inside. All of this helped to attract birds and these two lovely chipping sparrows. The late afternoon light was filtered by the overhead trees, creating this dreamy-like setting. This white-throated sparrow I shot last week has many of the ingredients that I consider important. That low camera angle will put the foreground and the background very out of focus. Of course, assuming your f-stop is almost wide open. Even though this photograph was taken late morning on a bright sunny day, the light is very pleasing because I selected a spot to set up my hide where the birds were under the canopy, resulting in incredibly soft and mottled light. I love that great attitude and expression, bending over and peeking at me. Of course, you have to be ready for these opportunities because the birds are quick. Excuse me for dropping in this picture of me in my hide. It works wonderfully, by the way. You need to be prepared for anything, especially action. When it happens, do not take one or two pictures. Make sure you shoot a burst for at least a second. And for most DSLRs, that means at least 7 photos. I can hear many of you saying, but I have to check my exposure. Didn't I say you have to be prepared? And that means constantly be thinking, constantly be checking all of your settings. There's a lot to think about, but it is very exciting and rewarding when you get a photo you can be proud of. It takes perseverance and intense focus. These following 3 photos show what I mean about composition and environment. This first one of the yellow-chinned spine tail is the first photo in the book, our book, Bringing Back the Birds. It really has a wonderful environment and feeling. It was a great way to start. This house finch feels like I'm still back in the fashion photography business because this bird is posing, twisting its body, turning its head. It didn't smile, but I love it. The background is soft, beautiful colors. For a plain house finch, it works. This Savannah sparrow that I shot, it's a teal in Canada when I was on a puffin trip with Mike Parr. I had to move around to get these highlights just where I wanted, and that's where I'm hand-holding my camera. It's made a major improvement in my photography and has tremendously increased the amount of enjoyment and fun I'm having. I owe all of this to my using the Nikon D850 with the 500mm VR. There are a couple of compromises to using this equipment, but for me, it's been well worth it because the D850 has such a high resolution. Noise can be a serious problem. If you shoot over 2500 ISO, it is crucial that your camera hand-holding technique is flawless and you will be rewarded handsomely. I often move just a few inches one way or the other to improve my composition and remove distracting elements that to me is crucial for a great photograph. I even quickly drop down on all fours. However, let me emphasize that whatever you do, move slowly, or the bird will be gone in a heartbeat. This is one of the hardest things to learn because of the excitement of being so close to getting that special photograph. When I started shooting birds 20 years ago, my biggest headache was identifying them. All I can say is thank God for Merlin. This is a free app you can use on your phone. You can take a photo of the back of your camera or computer monitor, and voila, it will identify the bird for you. At least most of the time. It almost always makes suggestions. It has taken most of the aggravation out of that part of this wonderful pastime that I so dearly love. By the way, there is another helpful tool for bird ID. All you need to do is join the American Birding Association's What's This Bird Facebook group and upload your photos, and experts will help identify them. Now I'd like to turn it over to Grace.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You're muted, Grace.
Now I'm good?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. There I am, making a fashion statement with my favorite outfit, a ball cap and waders. Owen, thank you for the handoff, and thank you to American Bird Conservancy for inviting me to be a guest today. Next slide, please. I'm going to speak to you a little bit today about something that I feel is very important, and that is being a good naturalist. I feel that will help you to be able to anticipate the behavior of your subject, which will translate into images that tell a story. I was very fortunate to live most of my adult life on the North Shore of Long Island, which was, there was a beach there that was home to several pairs of piping plovers. Now these little birds, that as soon as they hatch, they are called precocious, meaning they run around and search for their own food. They're not fed by their parents, such as a bird like a robin. So the parents have to keep these little tiny chicks warm. The chicks are only the size of a cotton ball. So if you're laying on the beach watching these birds and you see the parent come along and start to let out little clucking sounds, be aware that pretty soon the little chicks are going to run under their parents for a little bit of warmth. And if you're lucky and you're focused and you're paying attention, you might get one to peek out. Next slide, please. The other thing that these little ones do is search for their own food, like I mentioned. So knowing that, lay on the beach quietly, follow a chick with your lens, and you just may get lucky and find him pulling out a worm or an insect or some little tidbit for him to eat. Next, please. And from birth to flying, it only takes about a month. So it's very important for them to begin to exercise their little wings. And if you're watching for that, oftentimes they'll stop and then they'll just throw up their wings for a quick second. If you're not ready and you're not prepared to fire off a burst, you'll miss it. So this, my point again, is knowing what to expect will certainly help you get those really fun photos. Next, please. And you also need to be aware of the fact that the wind is important, because the way they really learn to fly is they get like a little gust of wind. And if you're aware of that, and I mean, we're not talking about a gale force wind, but just a gentle little evening breeze, as they're flapping their wings, they may actually rise up a little bit and you might get a photo such as this. Next, please. This is a juvenile piping plover. This one would be probably about 3.5 to 4 weeks old, really quite ready to fly. They bathe all the time. And when you watch that, next slide, please. This is what happens after a bath. They always raise their wings and give a little shake. So be ready. Next, please. I was extremely fortunate when I lived there to be involved in a few citizen science projects. And I would strongly recommend that as part of your development as a naturalist, you look around and see if there's anything that you can participate in and do. That it will really help you learn an awful lot about the birds and the habitat that they live in. These are horseshoe crabs, very critical to shorebirds. The project that I did was with Cornell, and what we would do was go out in the middle of the night, walk a transect, count the males and the females, and then on the way back, pick them up and tag them, measure them, etc. This data was turned into the fisheries departments, both the state and the federal, and then numbers were set as to how many of these crabs could be harvested each year. Especially in today's environment with the COVID. I don't know if you've happened to read any of the articles stating that these crabs' blood is very important. So knowing as much as we can about them is critical, not only for the birds, but for us as well. Just one quick thing I'd like to point out about this photograph. I used a very slow shutter speed here. I believe it was 1/20th of a second, so that the water, the motion of the water was not frozen. Horseshoe crabs aren't necessarily the most photographic subject. So if you can try to incorporate something like that in your photos, I think it ratchets them up a notch and makes them just a little bit more interesting by giving that feeling of the motion. Next, please. I'd like to speak just briefly about the importance of perspective. If you are shooting eye level at your subject, you're going to give your viewers a feeling of intimacy, like you're part of the bird's world. If you're shooting down on the bird, it gives you the feeling that you're imposing yourself on them. It's not a real appealing photo. You tend to feel like you're dominating them. And conversely, if you're shooting up at them, if there's a hawk in a tree or something, you walk right underneath and you shoot up. It's not appealing. So as often as you can, try to get eye level. We always have to be a little bit careful about our subjects and offer them the greatest respect. There is variation in terms of what birds will tolerate. This photo was taken on Long Island at Nickerson Beach at a place that is frequented by beachgoers and bird photographers. And the birds have become just extremely accustomed to people. So approaching them is not causing them any problem at all. In fact, they're very used to it. Other situations, not the same. So you really have to be careful and learn to read your birds. I'm firmly of the belief that if there's anything at all that you are doing as you photograph your subjects that is changing their behavior in any way, your best bet is to back off and give them the space that they need to do what's important to them. Next slide, please. I threw this shot in just to show you and to try to tie in with a very important point that Mike began his talk with, and that is take photos that are pleasing to you. This photo will certainly never grace a magazine cover. It's messy, it's not what I would say beautiful, but to Ted and me, it's very fun. We've lived in our house here in Texas for 3 years, and every single spring, the eastern phoebes insist on making a nest on that little pipe that comes out of our breezeway. The mud doesn't stick to it, so Ted and I zip tie a little piece of screen mesh to it, and each year these phoebes have produced many fledglings. This was the second brood of this year, the day that they fledged. This little one was the first to go, and the phoebe is now working on brood number 3. Next, please. We have to be extremely careful when photographing owls and raptors. It's kind of a common practice. I think it's falling out of favor now, thankfully, but it involves baiting owls and raptors. That means feeding them live food. You have to be thoughtful about doing things like that. You know, you don't really want to introduce something into their diet that is not something that they're used to, nor do you want to throw out a mouse that's going to cause them to fly at you and possibly get hit by a car or something like that. It's just, you're better off just trying to blend into their habitat and enjoy them for what they are. This particular situation was just one of my most favorite snowy owl experiences ever. This little bird was sitting in the dunes, totally unphotographable, buried in the grasses. But I had nothing else to do, so I laid flat on my belly, and sure enough, she dragged out this half-eaten rabbit carcass right in front of me and proceeded to pick at it. Next slide, please. And then to make matters only better, a peregrine falcon flew overhead and harassed her a little bit, probably trying to get at that rabbit carcass. So we got those big yellow owl eyes. And this was just me, myself, and the bird, quiet, not moving, just enjoying a moment in nature. Sometimes you're rewarded. Sometimes, of course, you're not. I'm going to just conclude my topic. Next slide, please. With a few things you can do to attract birds to your own environment, which will enable you to get some good photos and be good for the birds as well. Especially in the winter months, feel free to put out some suet and some bird feed. They'll come right in. You can set up a blind, or you can just sit quietly in a chair and snap a few nice photos. Next, please. Water, especially important in climates like I live in, Texas. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be a little saucer of water that you put on your deck railing. We have 3 or 4 bird water features around our land, and every day there's much use, especially in 100-degree temperatures. Next, please. Native plants, very important. The little stand of cedar sage on our land. When we got here, there were only 6 plants. I researched a little bit and found out that these plants like a little bit of light. So by removing a few straggly old cedar trees, we now have probably 600 of these plants or more. And the black-chinned hummingbirds love it. So it's great for the environment, it's great for the birds, and it's great for you. You're going to get some nice chances. Next, please. If you can, if it's appropriate for your environment, put up a couple of boxes, provide a little bit of shelter. This is a black-crested titmouse bringing a little morsel to the 3 chicks that you see on the left, and they fledged the day after this photo was taken. Next, please. Probably doesn't need to be said to this audience, but whatever you can do to reduce or eliminate pesticide use in your lawns and in your homes is good for you, and it's good for the birds. Obviously, osprey are one of the great success stories of our time. By eliminating the use of DDT, their eggshells are now hard, and they're doing rather well. Next, please. And the last point that I would like to make as I close out my portion of the talk, we're living in very strange times right now between the virus and the civil unrest that we're experiencing, and it's very easy to push the environment into the back of our minds. But now is the time. We don't have time to waste. So I'm going to suggest that as you make your decisions as to who you vote for elected office, both at the national, the state, and your local levels, study their positions on the environment and vote the people in who you feel are best aligned with your views. So with that, I am going to turn you over to Michael Stubblefield. You folks are in for a treat. Again, thank you and enjoy his presentation.
Thank you so much, Grace. I have to say she's a very hard act to follow, as is Owen. I've been watching the chat and enjoying it greatly, and I see a lot of comments there about gear. Like most all photographers, I am a total gearhead. I like my toys. I have a couple of advantages over many photographers. One, I'm huge. I'm like 6'5" and somewhere between 200 and 300 pounds, but I won't tell you where. And over the years, I've collected a lot of things. As Mike kind of pointed out, I am lucky in that I have some of the latest and greatest cameras. I'm currently shooting with the new Canon 1DX Mark III. I've used the Mark II, the Mark I. I've used the 1D Mark IV that Mike has. I've really used almost all of the Canon line over the years. But a couple of points about that, as you folks are saying, I see a lot of people worried about cost. It honestly is not the fiddle, it's the fiddler. Understanding your camera, knowing how to use it to its highest capabilities is really going to help you take good shots. There may be limits. You may be stuck shooting unbelievable shots at feeders or out of blinds of birds that are relatively static and not shooting flight shots, much less really, really complicated to pull off flight shots. But that's a good start. For people wanting to get started in photography, try to get a good shot of a mallard. It's shockingly hard. A robin, shockingly hard. Crows, almost impossible. They know you're coming and they just scoot away. Another couple things. If your photos aren't good enough, you're not close enough. So getting close to the birds responsibly, as Grace has so beautifully pointed out, is absolutely critical. So here I'm shooting with a 600 millimeter f4 lens with a 1.4 converter over my shoulders, a 300-2.8. Both of those with the 1D Mark I's or IIs. And again, my most important asset is my wife, who's next to me, who tolerates me both buying this gear and carrying it. Every once in a while, she'll carry something for me mercifully. Anyway, next slide. So Grace pointed this out. If you're trying to get an unbelievable shot of, say, a ringneck duck, which is what this is, and you're on Long Island, you're going to have a lot of problems. There's just not that many ringneck ducks. The ones that there are very wary. I happened to be out in Phoenix on a business trip and discovered something called Papago Park, where there were about 100 ringneck ducks being fed by everybody, as well as, you know, lesser scaup and some other amazing birds. So brought a little bird food like everybody else. You throw it into the water and the ducks come right at you. And it's also a desert environment without trees, so you can get this beautiful morning, or in this case, afternoon directional light. And, you know, all of the duck pictures I've ever taken of this species on Long Island can literally just be thrown away for a couple of hours sitting in this place. Next slide. Learning bird behavior is very important. Grace discussed it about the piping plover chick. They love to take a bath and then they like to raise their wings. This is exactly the same. I saw this osprey taking a bath in a puddle off of a parking lot down in Florida. And, you know, you probably all experience that warbler rush you get when you know there's a potential good shot or potential good bird, and you're this close. I had to kind of go around some stuff to get in position, all the while trying to get my tripod as low as possible so I could get eye to eye with the bird. And it paid off. I got beautiful photos of him bathing and the water going everywhere. But my favorite one is this intimate, like you're taking a bath with an osprey of his wings up. Next slide, please. So a lot of you I've seen on the chat wanting to know about flight photography. Flight photography, like the hummingbird photography, is really specialized. You can pull this off with older gear, but the newer gear is absolutely designed to make this sort of thing much easier. That's why I've invested in the 1DX Mark III. Knowing how to use your autofocus points, trying to keep them either right in the middle so you can put that over the bird's head, or just off to the side. As you go too far out, the autofocus points get less sensitive. And practice with it. I often will shoot in manual exposure and not aperture priority, certainly not tele priority, which we can discuss in the comments. But the reason for that is I'll have a zone where that bird is going to be in perfect exposure, and I'm trying to wait for it to go there. The other way to get successful flight shots is opportunity. It's very rare to have one bird flying by like this skimmer here and nail it. This was happening repeatedly, and I was just sitting there for an hour watching these birds fly by. And one of the things about me is I shoot a lot, and one of the things I like to say is the more I shoot, the luckier I get, which means that I will literally go on a day like this and shoot 3,000 or 5,000 images, all in RAW on gigantic cards, knowing full well that I have now several hours worth of deleting to get to these photos. But that's how I get photos like that. If I was shooting otherwise, I got the exposure off, the color balance was off, my ability to really make a high quality image like that would go away. Next slide. Same sort of thing. I'm shooting in manual exposure. I've got my autofocus in the middle where it's the most sensitive. And these crested puffins, I'm in the Russian Far East in Kamchatka. are just flying in one after the other, and I've got hundreds of shots of them. But of those hundreds of shots, I've got 2 or 3 that I really think are it, you know, or the shot that I really love. Next shot. To make things just a little more a little more difficult, now I'm shooting with a 600mm lens from a Zodiac with 12 people on it in seas with probably 3 to 5 foot swells. Again, I can get away with that. I frankly would much rather have Owen set up of that 500 f5.6 Nikon and a D800 for this, but knowing how to set your exposure so it doesn't just focus or expose for the water, knowing how to set your autofocus will allow you to come closer to getting shots like this. But again, lots of frame rates for this. Next one. More flying shots, same technique. You see a variation on a theme. Everybody has a different way of trying to do it. I feel like I'm like a bear once I caught a fish and started getting good shots, and I really got my autofocus tuned to the way I wanted and my technique tuned to the way I wanted. I literally probably had 500 shots of these stilts flying by, but only 1 or 2 of those perfectly sharp, acceptable field goal quality shots were really interesting where its head raised up. And the difference is I'm not shooting at 8 frames a second or 10. I'm shooting at 16 frames a second for a shot like this, which if you know birds, you can literally have it on the perch sitting there on 1 frame and a 10 or even 14 frames a second gone on the next frame. They move that quickly. So to get these really special things, I shoot the high frame rate. Next shot. Once you've kind of mastered that, then you can really start playing with common birds. This is a sanderling, one of my personal favorites. It's a breeding plumage, which is even better. It's a male, which is even better than that. And this is a great bird to practice on. They're relatively confiding. You sit on the beach, try not to get wet and let for them to come. You get down low. You get your autofocus tuned properly. You get your exposure tuned properly. And, you know, most of your shots are going to be very average, but getting one in mid-stride like this is just really quite a treat. It's become one of my favorite shots of that species. Next shot. And once you kind of have your ability to get shots in nice front lit situations down, then you can start playing. You can do what I do and get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and drive out to Nickerson Beach before I see Grace smiling on the camera because I know she's done it. And you get there before sunrise and you're getting these wonderful silhouette shots of these birds doing these amazing things. But most of them are just the boring flyby. Very nice to have. But if you really want that action, you've got to look for these interactions and not be afraid to waste frame rate on it and just deal with it. Every other shot in this sequence would have been a complete throwaway, but one was a good image. Next shot, next slide. And then finally, there's an artistic component to this. I absolutely love natural history art. I look at everybody else's photos. I look at paintings. You can see behind me a number of Audubons who really took it up a level from all of his predecessors, looking at composition and the ability to see what actually is going on. And when you get to that level, you know, you can start trying to make shots like this where it'd be very easy to take just a nice portrait of a penguin or a nice portrait of the penguin's head, but to really get it in its environment, doing what it's doing with other birds is, you know, to me, one of the real treats. I have very few photos that make me as happy as a photo like this. Next. So I hope I haven't bored you too much. My only other point is going back to getting close. This is actually shot out the window of my car, and that is full frame uncropped because I just sat there next to a line where these little baby barn swallows were sitting there begging and waiting for mom to come back, and most of the shots are just them sitting there staring at me. But at some point they'll flick their wings, they'll open their mouth, they'll do something cool. Anyway, next slide. All right, thank you. So now I'm going to turn this over to Jordan, who I think has been monitoring the questions.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for participating and watching this webinar. We greatly appreciate you taking the time. I also want to give a huge shout out for everyone that has been participating in the chat, as well as sending in questions through Facebook and the Q&A officially. We have so many. I don't know if we'll have time, but please know that if you go to the next slide, please, we are more than willing to help answer these questions. So please reach out to us and we will try to address them. For right now, though, as we get set up, I'd like to go through all of the presenters. And please, if you could share where you are located and primarily take birds right now, given that you're at home, as well as your go-to everyday gear, specifically camera and lens. that would be great. Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I've been photographing birds in my backyard with my son, Charlie, during the lockdown. We use our old car as a blind, and we drive it about 15 feet from the water feature to the feeder and back. Fortunately, the way our yard's set up, that gets us on eye level, so that mourning dove I showed you was taken from that. We've been feeding birds this spring, and we got some really fun photos. I love common grackles. They're extremely colorful in the right light. Cowbirds are so fun when they do the little displays. And, you know, if you get a little branch set up, you can get some great shots. I have the 1D Mark IV. I did have a 7D Mark II, which now Charlie uses, with a 400mm prime lens, which is a setup that a lot of people use. And I would recommend that. But there are many others that you can go with, but that's what we've been doing.
Thanks, Mike. Owen, where are you located and what equipment do you use regularly?
I'm in Chicago, Illinois, downtown, right near 10 minutes from Lincoln Park, from the Magic Hedge, which has got a reason for that name. It told what it was a game changer for me was the Nikon D850, very high resolution. Problem with that is noise, but you've got, if you don't want to get the, mine set so the ISO won't go over 2500. As far as extenders, I saw someone asked a question about that. I used to use the Nikon 300 VR with a 0.7, which equaled a 500mm length. I loved it. Then, I think it's a year and a half, 2 years ago, Nikon came out with the 500 VR, and it blew me away. I did not need an extender at all. And if you're critical and you're looking very close, there is a difference between using the 300 with a 0.7, 500mm, or just a 500mm. You match that up with the sensor size and the resolution of the 850, and I do blow up my pictures quite a bit. I don't use a zoom because I prefer a prime. If you're looking for the best quality, if I was shooting other subjects, I do have other lenses, but almost all the time I'm just using that right now for the last 2 years.
Grace, would you mind sharing where you are and what equipment you use?
Sure. As I mentioned in my part of the talk, I spent most of my adult life on Long Island, but 3 years ago, Ted and I retired to a small country town in Texas called Spring Branch. It's about halfway in between Austin and San Antonio. I am a Canon shooter, mainly because that's what I started with. And when you begin investing in gear, it becomes a little complicated and expensive to switch. Not that anything is wrong with Canon, but that's just what I know and that's what I'm comfortable with. I shoot with mainly a Canon 1DX Mark II as my camera body. I do have a 600 f4 prime. Often I couple that with a teleconverter, either a 1.4 or a 2 times, which gives me the equivalent of 1200mm. I also like to use the same lens that Mike Parr shoots with, that is the Sigma 150 to 600. I call that my walking around lens for the simple reason being that it's very hand holdable for a long time. Whereas the 600, I do need a tripod most of the time.
And Michael, would you mind sharing again where you are and what equipment you use?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in Jersey City, New Jersey. And I kind of shared with you, like Grace, I shoot a 600 f4 primarily. I have a version 2. I think she has a version 3, and we can debate. They're both superb lenses. I shoot with the 1DX Mark IIIs. I was shooting with the 2s up until just a couple of months ago, and these are, as with all of them, an incremental improvement. I also shoot a 100 to 400. I'll occasionally shoot a 300 2.8, and I didn't show it here, but I like to do a lot of perch setups where I may shoot with a Canon 5 DSR and like a 24 or 50mm prime lens. It really just depends on kind of what I'm doing. More recently, though, I've been carrying, my kit is the 600, the 100 to 400, a 1.4 converter, and a 16 to 35 f4 4 image stabilized Canon, which is good enough lenses for kind of scenics and perch setups that I've stopped carrying my prime lenses and actually really simplified what I carry around.
Thank you. I do want to recognize that we have had an incredible amount of questions asking about specific settings for the different photos in this webinar. I also want to share that we are recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on the ABC Birds YouTube for future viewing. So I'm going to skip most of those questions. I know it's really hard, but thank you for understanding. And I'm going to go to some of the more fun questions for the presenters. One is, if you could photograph any bird right now that you have not photographed yet, what bird would that be? And you can share if it's a specific behavior or in a certain pose, but what bird would you like to photograph? And we'll go in the same order. So Mike, would you start?
Well, I was actually hoping to go on a trip with Owen in July to Alaska, and it's had to be canceled for this year. We put it off till next year, but I was really looking forward to going to St. Paul Island in the Bering Sea and photographing horned puffins, tufted puffins, and a variety of alcids. And you never know what else you might find up there. So I'm really looking forward to that. And it's not just one species, but it's that whole suite of birds in Alaska. Still looking forward to that for next summer.
Owen?
Well, I don't consider myself a birder at all. The reason I like Merlin so much and ABAs, because I can't identify them, but that's not what I do for fun. I love how beautiful they are. My favorite bird is the prettiest bird I can find, and that's usually in the tropics. I've got a lot of beautiful birds here, but I don't have anything particular. It's just I have so much fun and excitement taking pictures of new and beautiful birds, and I usually feel like I have to travel for it because I've really got all the local birds quite a bit.
And Grace?
Well, you're going to laugh at this. Painted buntings are common here in Texas. I see them all the time. I have yet to get a good photo of one. They're a little bit tricky because of the red color. You're better off getting them either in early morning or late evening light. I've got a couple on like a big thick log. I've got one kind of bathing. You can only see part of him. So that's a species that I'm going to work on and hope to improve in time.
And Michael?
Yeah, so I'm glad I went last so I'd have time to think about this, but honestly, the truth is it's the next bird that I haven't photographed. It really kind of doesn't matter what it is. I was just in Arizona. I got these amazing shots of Quetzal, which is the, bird of yore down there, but I was just as happy figuring out that I had a different subspecies of verdins, which I have hundreds of shots of, and it was just in another location in a different desert. So it was slightly different. So I nerd out on the little things, not necessarily how pretty it is.
So the next question, I will also give you a second to think about, is what is your best advice for beginner bird photographers? This advice could be anything from try again and lots of practice, or it could be advice regarding how to start with the overwhelming sense of there's so many different pieces of equipment that you either need or sort through. So if each of you could think about what your best advice for a beginning bird photographer is, and I'm going to go to Mike first.
Well, it would be probably the same advice you asked me about, which is I would probably just say go for the 7D Mark II and the 400mm prime lens. If you can, or something equivalent to that. There's lots of options. I think a DSLR will probably help you lift your photography. There's no one answer. There's lots of point and shoots that can get great pictures. For me, I think when I did that, when I went to the DSLR, my photography went to a new level, and I was getting much more in the way of pictures that I was more happy with myself. And then the other thing is just find great places to go and photograph birds. And we'll have some things on the website. There are so many, there's great places everywhere. Your backyard is the first place to start, and just practice with your camera, getting used to taking pictures. That's how I would start off. Then go to the nearest wildlife refuge, get used to how to get close to birds, get some field craft going, start to understand how birds behave, as Grace was talking about. Those would be my main tips.
Thanks. Owen?
Sure. Learn the basics. takes a long time. There's a lot to remember. It's got to become second nature to you. Practice, just constantly practice. Flight photography, I've spent hundreds of hours just practicing, panning, all of that. Check your settings. Michael mentioned that earlier. Constantly, there's not a day I go out and I'm shooting a bird in a dark area, and all of a sudden a bright bird comes somewhere and I start shooting and I'm 2 stops underexposed. Check your settings, be patient, practice. It's fun, have a good time with it. I prefer to use light equipment. I walked around for many years with my 200 to 400 millimeter on a big tripod, flash on it. Take some of the fun. My shoulders still sore from that. In fact, almost had a problem. So now I'm having fun and I'm getting better pictures than ever. My advice.
Thanks, Owen. And Grace?
All right, I would say to you to buy the best lens that you can afford. I hadn't been wearing my engagement ring recently, and Ted asked me if I had sold it to buy more gear. You'll never regret investing in good glass. And then the second thing is, when you do decide on a setup, whatever the brand is, actually get out the manual and read it. And practice in your backyard, set up a little figurine or a stuffed toy or whatever, and work on your settings in that situation when you're controlling things. Because you have to understand, this is a very difficult venue. Nothing in nature is predictable. It's not like you're going into a studio and setting up lights and controlling everything. Here, everything is up in the air and you have to be ready. So those would be my suggestions.
Thanks, Grace. And Michael?
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm going to double down on what Grace said about the camera. I remember reading in Popular Photography years ago, when it actually existed, by a very prominent photographer who I don't know, that the camera is just a box that holds the film. It was all about the lens for him. And I think in wildlife photography, that's not quite as true, but I think the lens is much more important than the camera. I would rather have a 600 f4 and a 4 megapixel camera from, 1995 than have the latest and greatest 1DX Mark III with a really crummy lens. Another thing about lenses, though, is the white ones. And again, I'm a terrible person for getting people to spend money. I apologize to all the spouses out there listening to this, but I've actually bought big white lenses. What comes to mind is my 800 5.6, which was I think I paid $10,500 worth, the price of a car. I sold it for $11,000 after using it for 5 years. So the white glass will actually hold its value well, and I consider it an investment. Please don't kick me. I don't want to get bad comments over here. The other thing is pre-visualize. I would, looking at this beautiful shot of Mike's here of the black and white warbler, look at a photo, and I used to do this and think, okay, with the gear I have, how am I going to pull off that shot? What is my autofocus? Is it going to be on servo or one shot? Am I going to be moving them around or using all of them? What exposure am I going to use? Take the picture in your mind while you're laying in bed at night, dreaming of your photo excursion the next morning. So when you get to the field, it comes second nature. And if you do that for a couple of decades, you might get good at it. Because as Grace said, it is really freaking hard to get good bird photos.
Thanks, Michael. So we are at the top of the hour. And again, I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm and participation. We just have been inundated with questions that we can't get through all of them. But please, again, reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar both on YouTube, on the ABC channel, as well as in an email to registered participants. And again, thank you so much. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you found it interesting and informative. I always learn something from these great photographers, and these little things that you can learn can actually make a big difference in your photography. And I've really enjoyed birds my whole life, and photography has really put even a new dimension on that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists. And if you love birds like we do, please consider joining ABC at www.abcbirds.org or supporting the organization in our conservation work. And I hope to see you out in the field with the various cameras and getting some great photographs. So thanks for joining, and look online. We'll try and answer as many of the questions as we can in a follow-up. So thank you again, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you.